Well, today's sharing is a search for the Holy Grail and you. There are a number of puzzle pieces that I would like to share around that search. There's stories and illustrations, and one is a story about a young man named T.J. Ware. Some people are just doomed to be failures. That's the way some adults look at troubled kids. And maybe you've heard of the saying, a bird with a broken wing will never fly as high. I'm sure that T.J. Ware was made to feel this way almost every day in school. By high school, T.J. was the most celebrated troublemaker in his town. Teachers literally cringed when they saw his name posted on their classroom lists for the next semester. He wasn't very talkative, didn't answer questions, and got into a lot of fights. He had flunked almost every class by the time he entered his senior year, yet was being passed on each year to a higher grade level. Teachers didn't want to have him again the following year. TJ was moving on, but definitely not moving up. I met TJ for the first time at a weekend leadership retreat. All the students at school had been invited to sign up for ACE training, a program designed to have students become more involved in their communities. TJ was one of the 405 students who signed up. When I showed up to lead their first retreat, the community leaders gave this overview of the attending students. We have a total spectrum represented today, from the student body president to T.J. Ware, the boy with the longest arrest record in the history of the town. At the start of the retreat, T.J. was literally standing outside the circle of students against the back wall with that "go ahead and impress me" look on his face. He didn't really join the discussion groups, didn't seem to have much to say, but slowly the interactive games drew him in. The ice really melted when the groups started building a list of positive and negative things that had occurred at the school that year. TJ had some definite thoughts on those situations. The other students in TJ's group welcomed his comments. All of a sudden, TJ felt like a part of the group, and before long, he was being treated like a leader. He was saying things that made a lot of sense, and everyone was listening. TJ was a smart guy, and he had some great ideas. The next day, TJ was very active in all the sessions. And by the end of the retreat, he had joined the homeless project team. He knew something about poverty, hunger, and hopelessness. The other students on the team were impressed with his passionate concern and ideas. They elected TJ co-chairman of the team. The student council president would be taking his instruction from T.J. Ware. When T.J. showed up at school on Monday morning, he arrived to a firestorm. A group of teachers were protesting to the school principal about his being elected co-chairman. The very first community service project was to be a giant food drive organized by the homeless project team. These teachers couldn't believe that the principal would allow this crucial beginning to a prestigious 3-year action plan to stay in the incapable hands of T.J. Ware. They reminded the principal, "He has an arrest record as long as your arm. He'll probably steal half the food." Mr. Cogshell reminded them that the purpose of the ACE program was to uncover any positive passion that a student had and reinforce its practice until the true change can take place. The teachers left the meeting shaking their heads in disgust, firmly convinced that failure was imminent. But 2 weeks later, TJ and his friends led a group of 70 students in a drive to collect food. They collected a school record of 2,854 cans of food in just 2 hours. It was enough to fill the empty shelves in 2 neighborhood centers, and the food bank took care of needy families in the area for 75 days. The local newspaper covered the event with a full-page article the next day. That newspaper story was posted on the main bulletin board at school where everyone could see it. TJ's picture was up there for doing something great, for leading a record-setting food drive. Every day, he was reminded about what he did. He was being acknowledged as a leader. TJ started showing up at school every day and answered questions from teachers for the first time. And he led a second project collecting 300 blankets and 1,000 pairs of shoes for the homeless shelter. The event he started now yields 9,000 cans of food in one day, taking care of 70% of the needs for food for 1 year. TJ reminds us that a bird with a broken wing only needs mending. But once it is healed, it can fly higher than the rest. TJ got a job. He became productive. He's flying quite nicely these days. That story, I feel, is relatable because we all have wings that are in need of mending. We are all in need of being seen and loved and cared for. TJ just needed some direction and inspiration. He needed to be untethered from his past perception of others. He just needed a purpose and a place to land. And this is all these illustrations are moving us towards the Holy Grail of you and the Holy Grail. There's a book that came out about 10 years ago that I gave a class on in Cottonwood, Arizona, called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Some of you may have read this book. It's one of the most important books I have read in the last 10 years. Michael Singer presents a very astute witnessing to the mind's working, the higher mind and the lower mind. And some of us in our spiritual path may be invested in non-dualistic thinking, that there is no right or wrong or good or bad or up or down. There is only one. And yet, on our search for the Holy Grail, it is important, in a relative sense, in our learning capacity to realize that there are different aspects of consciousness, different places within us that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. If I was just to stand up here and to give you a little story out of that paints a picture through rose-colored glasses, it wouldn't be necessarily addressing all of the aspects of consciousness that you and I deal with. Michael Singer addresses our witnessing capacity. And he calls this voice in the head, well, he calls it the voice in the head, and Eckhart Tolle calls it the mind-made self that is a constant companion in our lives. But Michael Singer states, the inner path to greatness is often quite difficult, but it bears phenomenal fruits. So there is two parallels of how to be I think, in New Thought. There is the path of simple inspiration can have profound effects. And then there is also the other path that has that as a outcome, but it is also an examination of consciousness. Because, as we all know, we can get pumped up on a Sunday, but like a tire with a slow leak, we can get deflated by Wednesday. And there is this need, I feel, to have a spiritual understanding of the psyche, of the consciousness that we all deal with and move through and navigate with towards our quest for the Holy Grail. Michael Singer said, "The first thing I learned was to distinguish between productive intellectual thought and intuition and the ongoing personal melodrama." Ever felt like your life was a melodrama? That comes from the voice in the head. And you might say, well, is this really necessary to have this kind of investigation? Well, there's a place on the path where we become identified with the witnessing capacity of consciousness, and we recognize that the voice in the head is not me, that we can choose whether to entertain that voice or not to entertain that voice. And knowing that is our freedom, our spiritual freedom. And that inspiration has moved through my consciousness for many, many years. And it's the only conversation really worth having. In terms of the person or people that are standing in front of me, how can I serve? How can I facilitate that knowing, that felt knowing, so that it isn't just about getting your tire pumped up on Sunday and then having a slow leak later? Happiness is a requirement by our humanity. It's a beautiful thing. But it comes and it goes, like the wind. What remains is our being. And through understanding, we can have that inner joy that is behind happiness. And that is what lives long and is ongoingly present. So Michael Singer has in his book a chapter called The Inner Roommate. Some of you may remember that chapter. He likens this inner roommate as kind of a bad roommate. That voice in the head. I'd like to illustrate and flesh out that voice for just a few moments with another story, another illustration. How many people in the room have heard of the story of the tortoise and the hare? Most of us have. It was introduced to us when we were small children. But that story is an illustration of consciousness. So the hare and the tortoise are at the starting line. For some reason, I don't recall the specifics, but they agree to have a race. And those that are gathered to watch this race chuckle to themselves, thinking, oh my gosh, I bet all my money on the hare. So they set off. The hare leaves the tortoise in the dust. But the tortoise is not dissuaded. He moves forward inch by inch. foot by foot. And the hare is all over the place, taking in the delicacies of the desert, the flora around him, because he knows it's no problem to outrun the tortoise. All the while, the tortoise is moving towards the goal. Towards the end of the day, many hours later, the hare gets it that, oh my gosh, the tortoise is almost at the finish line, and races back. But the tortoise wins the race. Now, this story is not about a race, but it's about two aspects of consciousness. One, the hare, is the voice in the head, going here and going there, tasting this and tasting that. And there's nothing wrong with having an experience like that. Life is for living. But the tortoise is that aspect of us that is the soul, that perseveres inch by inch, slowly, gracefully, and with incredible determination towards the union, the finish line in consciousness. What is the finish line? Is there a finish line for our lives? I don't know that there's a finish line, but there is a goal, a union with God. And I want to share with you something on Easter morning, almost 2 years ago, my first Sunday here. I saw within my inner vision a holy grail in this room, a chalice as tall as that projector. And it was amazingly, it was filled with light. It couldn't hold a liquid, but it held light. And I said to myself intuitively, that's the goal of my work here. The goal of my work here is to be a proponent, an advocate of the Grail within each one of us. Because humanity has this strange habit that it projects inner life onto outer life. And people have been searching for the Holy Grail for hundreds of years. They liken it to the small cup that was shared at the Last Supper 2,000 plus years ago. But I would like to offer to you that you are the Holy Grail. Your search for God has never been closer than it is right now. You're the Holy Grail. I'm reminded of a very familiar story. Some of you have probably heard this story before. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, 3 very wise sages were comparing notes for humanity. And they said, humanity is not ready for the truth. We must hide it from them. And the first sage said, let us hide it on the highest mountaintop. They'll never think to look there. The other said, no, we must hide it in the deepest ocean. They'll never look there. And the third sage said, no, we will hide it within their heart. They'll never think to look there. This process is about uncovering the truth that is within our heart. You are the Holy Grail. And you may feel, who, me? If you knew my story, if you knew what kind of a person I was, how could you say that about me? Well, that's the voice in the head. That's the inner roommate that has that ongoing chatter our whole lives. And perhaps it's a functional tool for us to exercise our will, to say yea or nay around what it is that we truly are. Perhaps it is that element within consciousness that says, I will or I will not believe this as my truth. Who am I really? Well, I am of God. I am the Holy Grail. And our spiritual work, if we can call it that, is to empty the cup of what we have believed we are and clean it out, and then allow it to be filled with the actual presence, the actual power, the actual truth of the divine. Because we are already that. We are the Grail. The story is archetypal. It is symbolic of our own true nature. And it is my greatest hope that you allow that in. You may already claim that for your life. And if you really feel it, then perhaps then you can be a vessel for going and serving someone else that has forgotten it. Because it's a strange thing, this life seems to be, and the ancients have talked about this forever, that there is this veil of forgetfulness that has been drawn across our eyes and our remembrance of our actual nature. And perhaps that's all in divine order. Nothing wrong here. It is just simply the task of being a human being. And then coming to a place in our unfoldment, in our evolution, where we say, I'm going to remove that veil, or I'm going to allow it to be removed. I'm going to allow my light to shine. I'm not going to hide my light under a bushel any longer. I take a stand for the truth of who I am. That's what's offered within this place. This place was built upon the spiritual principles of divine remembrance and reclaiming ourselves as our true self, as the Grail, the self. I wanted to close with a statement by Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk back in the 1950s and 60s who was very, very influential in the East and in the West. It was born out of his contemplation and service to humanity and just for who he is. And he said, "We are already one. My dear brothers and sisters, we are already one, but we imagine that we are not. What we have to recover is our original unity. What we have to become is what we already are. So my invitation to all of us in this room is to behold that, with that oneness within each other. To behold that you are, in fact, I do invite you. After the service, greet at least 3 people and say to them, I behold you as the Holy Grail. The search is over. Tag, you're it. Thank you.